On July 8, 2014, Mayor Rahm Emanuel's Minimum Wage Working Group issued a report recommending that the City of Chicago phase in a minimum wage of $13 per hour by 2018. Prior to that, public meetings were held throughout the city, and it became clear at these meetings that some Chicagoans held sharply differing points of view about whether and how Chicago's minimum wage should be increased. In the interest of clarifying this conflict, we've gathered 3 articulate and knowledgeable speakers, 2 so far, each of whom holds a perspective on the minimum wage that is clearly distinct from the other 2. I've asked our speakers to address a number of questions in their opening remarks. First, why have proposed minimum wage increases gained traction in recent years on municipal, state, and national levels? What political and economic factors account for this phenomenon? In other words, why the minimum wage and why now? Second, what is your ideal vision or goal for the minimum wage in Chicago, in Illinois, and in the US? How might this goal have implications for potentially related phenomena such as unemployment, working hours, healthcare costs, immigration, capital flight, and the viability of small businesses? In light of this goal, why do you support or oppose the recommendation that the City of Chicago phase in a minimum wage of $13 an hour by 2018? Finally, what future do you predict for the minimum wage in Chicago and Illinois and in the US? What will happen if Chicago adopts the recommended increase? What will happen if this recommended increase is not adopted? The format of our conversation will be as follows. Each speaker will be given 10 to 12 minutes for opening remarks, after which we'll have 2 rounds of rebuttals, during which each speaker will be given 3 to 4 minutes per round. Then speakers will respond to written questions submitted by the audience and posed by me, and this Q&A dialogue will proceed for about half an hour until we hear brief 3 to 4 minute closing remarks from each speaker. The event will end by 7:55 p.m., at which time we request that you promptly exit the library as we close at 8 p.m. Audience members may submit written questions once the first round of rebuttals begins. You can raise your hand to get the attention of our branch manager, Joanna Hazelden, sitting in the back corner, who will provide you with an index card and a golf pencil. Once you've finished writing your question, raise your card and she will collect it. I'll do my best to give voice to each question, but we only have about 30 minutes for Q&A, so I will give priority to issues raised by multiple audience members, and I will aggregate questions whenever possible. Due to time constraints, audience members will not be invited to contribute spoken questions or comments, and any speaking done by an audience member will unfortunately be considered a disruption of the event. We don't like asking people to leave, so please share your thoughts with us by writing rather than by speaking. Now I'll introduce our speakers in the order in which they will speak. Jorge Mujica supports an immediate $15 an hour minimum wage and the right to organize at every shop and company. He is a socialist who is running for alderman in Chicago's 25th Ward. Jorge was one of 3 core conveners of Chicago's 2006 Marches for Immigration Reform and has worked extensively with labor unions in election campaigns, organizing efforts, pickets, and strikes. At the end is Deirdre McCloskey. She opposes a minimum wage increase. She is a Christian libertarian who teaches at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Deirdre is an economist, historian, and rhetorician who has written 16 books, including a multi-volume series on the bourgeois era, as well as around 400 scholarly pieces on topics ranging from technical economics and statistics to transgender advocacy and ethics. And finally, our third panelist, who has yet to show up but will hopefully arrive soon, is Alderman Joe Moore. Joe Moore supports a phased-in $13 an hour minimum wage increase. He has served as alderman of Chicago's 49th Ward since 1991. He sponsored Chicago's 2006 Big Box Living Wage Ordinance, which required large retail stores to pay their employees a wage sufficient to keep a family of 4 out of poverty. And he now serves on Mayor Rahm Emanuel's Minimum Wage Working Group. With that, please join me in thanking our speakers for being with us this evening. Jorge?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak up and say what a socialist thinks about minimum wage. Why asking for a minimum wage now? Why not in 2015 or 2016 or 2020? Or why not in 2011? Or why not in any time? Basically, the answer is because we want $15 an hour. And that's it. This is, I think, a discussion that has been conditioned to prices, index prices, how much can you live on, and it's a race to the bottom. Economists are trying to prove that you can live with a minimum possible income. And we believe that discussion is wrong. We believe that we deserve whatever we can win, and we think we can win $16 an hour. I don't think minimum wage depends on economics at all, whatsoever. It depends on politics. It depends on a dynamic that says that the owner of a company has to get away with paying the bare minimum to all employees in order to have the most profit. That's the end and the bottom line of the discussion. If I can pay 6, I will pay 6, and if I can pay 5, I will pay 5. And if I can gain, having profits 11, I will have 11, and if I can have 13, I will have 13, and I will have 18, and I will have 800%. Why not? Well, the same question is what we are asking. Why not? Don't talk to me about the price of bread. Don't talk to me about the price of rice. And don't tell me that, you can survive on beans. Why not? Beans are cheap. You don't need $15 an hour. You can get away, you can live and you can survive on 12. Or you can survive on $8.25. And of course the discussion is larger than amounts of money. The discussion is about a minimum wage, a novel idea brought up by Roosevelt, back in the years of 1933, with the first proposal of a minimum wage in the United States, which was actually blocked by the Supreme Court, saying that no, that business have the right to just pay whatever they bargain with their employees. At that time, there were not even strong labor unions under the law that could bargain in good faith. But well, set that apart. 1939, first minimum wage law. We are still stuck, Alderman. We are still, how you doing? We are still stuck with the same minimum wage law. And that minimum wage law, the only thing that says basically is that you have to pay a minimum, but it has exceptions. For instance, you have less than 4 workers, you don't have to pay minimum wage. And I see that on a daily basis. I work on recovering stolen wages. If you have less than 4 workers, you don't have to pay minimum wage. You can pay $1 an hour, $2 an hour, it doesn't matter. So any small business, really small business, is exempt since 1939 from paying minimum wage. Domestic workers, 1.8 million domestic workers in the United States, they are not entitled to minimum wage. They are not even workers according to the law. They are domestic companions. So you don't have to pay minimum wage. You can hire your babysitter, you can hire a live-in aide, and you don't even have to pay minimum wage. You don't have to pay overtime either. They are not entitled to pay to overtime. You can wake him up at 3 o'clock in the morning to take care of the baby because it's crying, and you don't have to pay any overtime, and there's no short turnaround. There's nothing. They are completely exempt. Workers with disabilities. If you are a certified company, certified by the federal government to hire workers with disabilities, then they are not entitled to minimum wage. And there are thousands upon thousands of minimum wage workers, of workers with disabilities that don't get paid minimum wage. The Goodwill stores, big chain, huge chain of business making billions of dollars a year. They are paying, one example just here, between 2012 and January 2013, she, so referring to a worker, made as little as $3.27 for 24 hours of work. Yeah. Goodwill pays down as low as 22 cents an hour to workers with disabilities. You tell me, economics has to do with this. Oh, no, it's because they can't perform 100%. So we won't pay them 100% of even the minimum wage. We pay them according to their capacities, their abilities. So this wage sounds to me like this worker has like 1% abilities because she's been paying like 1% of the minimum wage. Yeah, I don't think that's correct, but that's legal. Car wash workers, according to a study of University of Illinois, car wash workers, 75.6% of them are paid below minimum wage. 13% are paid below $2 an hour. 98% of them are not paid overtime at all. At all. So you tell me the discussion about minimum wage is, oh, no. Let's see, if we can pay you only 23 cents, 42 cents an hour. What about that? Why not $9? And that's it. You try to figure out how to live on that. Because the discussion obviously is geared to let's make the more profit for the companies and let's expand as little as we can in the workers. So again, why now? Because we have been able to create a movement that is demanding $15 an hour, and I would say shouldn't be even be 15. 15 it was when we started this 2 years ago. Now we should be demanding $16 an hour, or maybe $17 an hour. Why? Because we believe we can get it. Because we believe we can win. Because in this country, as in any other country pretty much, you get what you fight for. You don't get what you negotiate for with your company. You get what you are able to win in a battle. You win when you create such a problem, a social problem, that every politician wakes up with a headache saying, I have to solve this thing today. And that's the way we have solved the biggest problems in the United States, from the Vietnam War to, well, many other examples, the labor unions, the existence of labor unions. That's how we were able to win, by battling and struggling. The civil rights movement wasn't based on economics. What's good for a Negro? Excuse you me, but no, that's not the discussion. Yeah, the discussion was every human right has to have the same rights in the United States. And they didn't do it by counting votes. So let me see. Now we have so many Democrats, so many Republicans. We don't even have Republicans in the city of Chicago. So I think, we shouldn't have problems because they are they seem to be the culprits for every problem in the nation, but not in Chicago. We shouldn't have problems because we don't have Republicans. So the Democratic Party in Chicago, should be able to say, yes, everybody's entitled to a decent living, and decent living starts with at least $15 or $16 or $17 an hour. Unless, of course, they reverse the discussion and tell us that, no, wait a second. Corporations who are making millions and billions of dollars are entitled to earn more and more and more and pay the minimum bare they can. Mr. Sanjay Jha, CEO of Motorola Mobility, is earning $47 million a year. He's entitled to that. Of course he is. Why the McDonald's worker is not entitled to earn $17 or $16 an hour? Oh, who knows? If you're an owner, if you're a CEO, then you're entitled. But if you are just, that fast food service worker, no, you're not entitled to that. Come on. I want the Democratic Party majority in City Council to tell us that. You're going to bankrupt the economy? Well, it hasn't bankrupt since 1939 when the minimum wage law was approved. And it hasn't bankrupt every time the minimum wage has gone up. Yeah, don't tell me that the economy of the United States is going to collapse or that the economy of Chicago is going to collapse. The economy of Detroit collapsed, and they were paying only $7.25 an hour, federal minimum wage, and they collapsed. So don't tell me there's a direct relationship between bankruptcy of a city, and the minimum wage. I think Chicago should pay and should approve an immediate increase to minimum wage for all companies over 50 workers, and yes, with small and medium to small businesses prorated, and it's had to be indexed to inflation. You increase your prices because you're paying more wages, well, then you will have to pay more wages next year around because you increase your prices and you are contributing to inflation, not your workers. Your workers are just spending every penny they have available. Yeah, you are the one increasing the prices. You increase them, you provoke an inflation, you will be paying more wages next year. So keep that in mind. I think that's about 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To shoot? Yes. Well, I have a speech defect and my voice is low. And if you can't stand it, you can run screaming from the room. That's okay, I won't mind. I'm an economist, as has been mentioned, and I think this is an economic issue. It's not only an economic issue. I agree it has to do a lot with politics and society. And in fact, I'm in favor of a minimum income. I'm in favor of me being taxed to make sure that if people are in true trouble, they get income from the government. But I'm not in favor of interfering with the wage bargain as it is. Why not? Why not impose a higher minimum wage on McDonald's with the obscene CEO income? Well, because if you have a minimum wage, any minimum wage, some workers are going to be under it in the amount they can earn for the companies. And if they are, they won't be hired. It's as simple as that. Because a wage is not something that the government decides. It's a bargain between you and your employer. I mean, I'd like to be paid $500,000 a year. If I go into my boss and say, I'm worth $500,000, he'll say, see you around. Because there are other people willing to work to do my job at less than $500,000 a year. If we have a minimum wage of $13 or $15 or $17, why not a minimum wage of $100?
Why not?
If you can make, look, I agree. If I thought we could make poor people better off by act of Congress or by act of the Chicago City Council, I would enthusiastically approve it. That's great. You just make a law and suddenly everyone's better off. Gee whiz, that's great. But that's magical thinking. That's to suppose that there's this kind of enormous fund sitting out there and all we workers need to do is to go grab it, and then we'll be vastly better off. And I just don't think it's true. I think it's crazy. It's not gonna work. So it's worth understanding, by the way, an interesting historical fact. It's true that the federal minimum wage was adopted in 1939. Germany, by the way, up till now hasn't had a minimum wage, but it's about to adopt one. But the first minimum wages in the United States were in places like Massachusetts and New York around 1910, 1900. And if you look into this, you'll discover that the reason for the minimum wage was to keep immigrants, blacks, and women out of the labor force. That was the declared purpose. That's what the newspaper editorial said. That's what the advocates of the minimum wage said. They said, look, if we make the wage high enough, those those presumably, I don't actually think that's true, but those low productivity people like immigrants fresh off the boat, blacks, Hispanics, and women won't be able to get a job at all. And in fact, this is hard to imagine, but they hitched it to eugenics. That is, trying to improve the race by killing off the poor people. That was literally their idea. And we can learn from that history. We can learn that that is the effect of artificially intervening in the wage bargain. A $13 minimum wage, a $17 minimum wage for Chicago would be a slow train wreck for Chicago. It would mean that a black teenager couldn't get a job, just would not be able to, because of discrimination, because of inadequate education. He might not be worth $13 an hour. And what employer is going to voluntarily hire someone who initially is worth $8 an hour? He can improve. He can learn how to show up on time, as we all had to learn when we were kids, and he'll improve. But he can't get on the ladder at all at $13 an hour. So strangely, it sounds crazy. It's another this crazy economist professor. She's a nutcase. What do you think? She's against raising wages for poor people. No, I'm not. I'm against unemployment for very poor people. The main supporters of the minimum wage, you will find, are trade unions. The strong trade unions, for example, in Chicago, make much more than the minimum wage. So why are they in favor of the minimum wage? Well, they don't want substitutes. They don't want people in the labor force who can do even part of their job. They want to keep them out of the labor force. So you see, it's the same logic as in 1910. Raise the minimum wage, make the bargain between a company and a person unprofitable if the person is unskilled. And then you as a skilled plumber don't need to worry about competition from those poor folks. So, I'm not in favor of business. That's not what the issue is. It's not we the workers versus the firms. Because the firms make stuff for us, they employ us, they're owned by us directly or indirectly. Firms are made up of people. They're not out on Mars or someplace where we can tax them and hit them with a higher minimum wage, and that'll hurt those people on Mars. They're not on Mars, they're here, and they're us. As famously said once, we has met the enemy and he is us. So it's not a good idea to cripple ourselves in our ability to give young, poor, badly educated people a chance in the job market. But I'm quite serious about this minimum income. And if you learn nothing else this evening, understand that a minimum income is not the same thing as a minimum wage. The thing about what's the attractive from a politician's point of view about the minimum wage is that the government doesn't have to pay it. You don't have to tax anyone to hand the money over to poor people. You just say to the bosses, you have to pay more. You have to pay more, not voters, you. And it's a mistake because it creates unemployment, it'll make unemployment worse, it'll drive employment out of Chicago. Whereas if we really want to help the poor, and I do, that's why I got into economics when I was a kid. I've always wanted to help the poor, and the way to help the poor is to give them money. There was an old cartoon back in the New Yorker in the 1960s when the war on poverty started, and there was this bank truck pulled up to the curb, and the bank guards were handing out money to people. And a bystander said, "Thank God, the war on poverty has finally gotten underway." And that's right. Give the poor the wherewithal, if they're falling below what we regard as a socially minimum income. We employed people should be willing to be taxed to help them out. That's my view. But we shouldn't make it impossible for the handicapped, the discriminated against, the badly educated, the young, to learn anything at all. It's not allowing them to have the self-respect that comes with a job. I have a friend, a professor at Northwestern, who has a severely handicapped daughter, and she works as a bagger in a grocery store, and that's honest work, and she feels proud that she's able to do this, and she is. And why not let her work? If you force the grocery stores to pay her $13 an hour, she'll be out of a job tomorrow. So that's it. Don't raise the minimum wage. Don't have a minimum wage. Have a minimum income.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me this evening. My name is Joe Moore. I represent the 49th Ward in Chicago, which is the Rogers Park community. So thank you, Edgewater folks, for allowing me to venture south of Devon Avenue this evening. I've been on the city council quite some time, 23 years to be precise, and introduced and sponsored and supported lots of measures over the years, and one of the measures that I was most proud to support was in 2006, a measure to require employees of big box retail stores, stores that are 70,000 square feet in size or larger, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Costcos and the like, require them to pay their employees what we call the living wage. And a living wage was defined as a wage that would enable a family of four to live above the poverty line. And back in 2006, it was $10 an hour plus $3 an hour in benefits. It was inspired in part by our battle to keep Walmart and its predatory practices out of the city of Chicago. While we were unable to ultimately do that, we did feel that once they were in Chicago, they, as well as their counterparts, some of the richest corporations in the world, deserved to and should be obligated to pay their employees an amount of money that was sufficient to keep them out of poverty. Because the fact is, back then and today, many Walmart employees and many employees of the other big box stores and other companies, we are subsidizing those companies because their employees, because they don't make a sufficient amount of money, have to come to us for additional assistance, for assistance with food stamps and other government benefits in order to enable them to make ends meet. So the question to me was, who was going to pay, the taxpayers or the corporations? And I felt in this case that it made more sense for the corporations to pay those wages. And back then, there were a lot of the same arguments that I heard raised against it that are raised today against an increase in the minimum wage, that were raised against the institution of the minimum wage back in the 1930s, that were raised against child labor laws, they were raised against worker safety laws. In essence, the same arguments that are raised anytime government steps in to try to level the playing field and to try to soften and smooth over the excesses of an unbridled free market. And each and every time those arguments were raised, and the preeminent one, of course, is that it's going to lead to huge job loss. Each and every time those arguments made, and those arguments were ignored, experience has shown that those arguments had no merit. So this isn't a legal theory, or this isn't a theory. This is a fact. This is a practice. You can look at what has happened in our economy when we started allowing people to organize, when we started to allowing a floor beneath which people should not be paid for an honest day's labor. And what we ended up having is an economy that grew. The U.S. economy grew tremendously in the 20th century after the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the income gap between those who earned the least amount and those that earned the most narrowed. And we saw an explosion in the middle class, where people who never dreamed that they would be able to own their own home, or send their children to college, or enjoy some of the creature comforts of life were able to do so, because there was a philosophy back then that everyone deserved to have the basic minimums in life, that everyone deserved to have a decent wage, that everyone deserved to have opportunity for themselves and hope for the future. Unfortunately, we've sort of lost sight of that. The nation, beginning in the 1970s and through the 80s, has taken a very serious rightward trend, and a lot of the same discounted arguments against minimum wages and other legislation to lessen the harsh effects of an unbridled free market were once again raised. And of course, we're hearing the fact that, or the assertion that any increase in the minimum wage is going to hurt poor people more than it helps them. Well, I would ask the average low-wage worker if they would like to have a minimum wage, and you will say that the vast majority of them say, of course, they support an increase in minimum wage. And that is exemplified in the advisory referendum that have been on the ballot throughout the city, regardless of the economic circumstances of the neighborhood. Ballot measures that ask people whether they support an increase in a minimum wage, whatever that amount be, are supported by an overwhelming number of people. And of course, they're supported by an even greater overwhelmingly number of people in the low-income neighborhoods. Why is that? Are they stupid? No, they get it. They experience the difficulties and the challenges of raising a family, of having to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. So, what are the facts? Well, if we increase the federal minimum wage from its current level of $7.25 an hour to $10.10 an hour, just that, not even 13, not even 15, but just to $10.10 an hour, that alone would raise 900,000 families above the poverty line. That increase would pump 85, let me get my glasses. $35 billion into the U.S. economy. And why is that? Because those with the lowest incomes tend to spend their increases in the local economy. They don't invest the money in offshore investments. They don't invest it in Wall Street. They invested in the stores and the businesses in their local community, putting money back in the economy, creating more wealth in the local economy, and hence creating more jobs. After subtracting the costs of the increase, the U.S. economy would gain $22.1 billion. And given the tepid economy, an injection of cash to low-wage workers through such a hike would likely have a significant impact on overall employment. Now, we have some laboratories to show what what effect the increase in a minimum wage would have on jobs. Who was the Supreme Court Justice? Was it Felix Frankfurter, who talked about the states being the great laboratories, the great ability to experiment? Well, the 13 states that have raised their minimum wage at the beginning of 2014 experienced a job growth at a higher rate than the 37 states whose minimum wage remained flat. A job growth, not a job reduction. See, hikes increase, when you increase the minimum wage, you not only benefit those at the lowest wage level, those making a minimum wage, you also increase those who are making slightly above minimum wage. So it ends up providing even a greater boost to the economy and allowing those earning up to 150% of the minimum wage to earn more money. And those folks represent 29, almost 30% of the national workforce. In Los Angeles is similar. Los Angeles, like Chicago, there is a proposal to increase the Chicago minimum wage to $13 an hour. I was part of the task force formed by Mayor Emanuel to recommend an increase in the wage, and we, after much discussion and give and take, reached a consensus on $13 an hour. Reasoning, and as a matter of fact, that $13 an hour is equivalent to San Diego's $15 an hour, Seattle's $15 an hour when you take into account that Seattle has a higher cost of living. So the impact to Chicago workers of this $13 minimum wage, if it's enacted by the city council, is equivalent to Seattle's $15 minimum wage. So why is and just pound on the gavel when I got 2 minutes? All right. Why is a minimum wage needed? Well, Illinois' current minimum wage is $8.25 an hour. It's not a living wage. It's not even a wage you can subsist on. It leaves many earning it dependent upon public assistance, food stamps, subsidized housing, and Medicaid. So the question to me is this: why should the taxpayers subsidize this cost? Why shouldn't the employers of these people subsidize these costs? In Chicago, the average household pays 31% of their income for rent. That's the average. That means half the folks pay more than 31% of their income for rent. Nationally, rent taking up more than 1/3 of income is considered unhealthy for a household budget and endangers a family's financial well-being. An increase in the minimum wage will enable people literally to pay the rent. 1/3 of Chicago workers make less than $13 an hour, and 2/3 of these people are older than 25 years of age, which belies another assertion you hear all the time, that all these people making minimum wage are all college kids, they're all high school kids, they're all living at home, and they're spending the money on iPods and what have you. No, there are people who are supporting families or supporting themselves, a lot of them that are earning only a minimum wage. Current wages have not kept up with inflation. Adjusted to 2013 dollars, the minimum wage that was paid, the federal minimum wage in 1969, if it had been adjusted to inflation, today would be $10.71. In other words, if it had kept up with inflation, the federal minimum wage would be 32% higher today than it actually is. Meanwhile, the average CEO compensation compared to that of workers was 20 to 1 in 1965. 20 to 1. Nice, healthy differentiation between the worker bees and the ones running the company. You know what it is today? 259.9 to 1. 260 to 1 in 2013. And I see you getting the hook.
Yes. Okay, so at this time, we'll have 2 rounds of rebuttals. During each round, each speaker will be given 3 to 4 minutes to respond to points raised by the other 2 speakers. Also at this time, please raise your hand if you would like an index card. Joanna will be passing around the index cards. You can write a question, and then I will pose these questions that we receive to our speakers after the rebuttal rounds. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. A few points. A salary is not something you bargain. Only 9% of the labor force in the United States is unionized. Unless, of course, you're talking about bargaining when you are the economic advisor of some company and you're going to get hired for $500,000. Yeah, then you can bargain that. That's the people who bargain salaries. I don't bargain my salary. You know, I'm offered what I'm offered, and I don't have the power to say, hey, hell no, you know, I want $100,000. I get paid what the job rate is. And the job rate says that minimum wage is minimum wage, and it's $8.25, and if I can, I will steal from those $8.25, period. You know, the city of Chicago has paid, according to latest releases, $49 million just to settle police lawsuits. I mean, lawsuits against police officers. Why do we spend money in that kind of things? Nothing personal, Joe. Aldermen earn $55 an hour. Yeah, that's what you make. $114,000 on average, more or less. $55 an hour.
Is that on an hourly basis?
Well, if you work full time, which I know for sure that many aldermen don't do. So if they work less, then they are paid $110 an hour. So they could, you know, very easily imagine that, you know, $15 an hour would be incredibly fair. Why not? I have a good idea. If we start talking about a minimum income, why don't we talk about a maximum wage, a maximum income? Why not? Let's say you can only earn, what do you like? Instead of the 269%, let's say you can only earn 25 times what your average worker earns. Why not? We could do that. Or we can go to the, you know, maximum possible wage. Let's say that a young, poor, uneducated, that's what a minimum wage is for. Okay, let's settle for this. Let's say you can only pay minimum wage to people between 15 and 24. Okay, and then you have to pay like $20 an hour for people up to 35 years. And then you have to pay $40 an hour for people up to 49. I mean, what is this thing about the youth, poor, young, unemployed, uneducated? No, I don't think age, I don't think race, I don't think anything has to do with how much you should be paid. You know, when the economic crisis hit, some jobs started disappearing. 16% of all jobs that disappeared during the economic crisis were better paid jobs. Nevertheless, 78% of the jobs created after the crisis, starting in 2012, were minimum wage jobs. What that tells me is that I was paying $16 an hour before the crisis. After the crisis, I reopened that same job, but now I only pay minimum wage. That's it. So it's the process of impoverishing whoever I can impoverishing, because if you don't like it, close the door, you know, leave and close the door, and there's going to be another worker taking it for $8.25. That's the simple economics the economics of making a bundle, yeah, and making the most profit I can make, and forget about a worker. That figure it out. That's it.
Well, we should talk about these facts, and I think you agreed, Alderman, that facts are tricky to interpret. That those states that have raised the minimum wage are doing well may be caused by the fact that they're doing well. So they raise the minimum wage, in which case the causation is in the other direction. If raising the minimum wage was good for employment, for income, for the welfare of the poor, you guys haven't explained to me why we shouldn't make it $30 an hour or $100.
He won't explain. He'll go, okay.
I know, he'll say okay.
I'll say okay, sure.
But you won't, Joe.
No.
And then you have to explain why it's impractical. If it's impractical to go to $30 an hour, why is it practical to go to 13? Now, there are contrary facts that I'm an old person, very old, older than I look, I hope. And I remember in the 1950s, it was very easy, even in Chicago, for a young, a 16-year-old to get or a 15-year-old to get a summer job. Now, look how hard it is for any young person to get any kind of job, summer or not. In the 1950s, it turns out, African Americans had a lower unemployment rate than white Americans, lower. And that's because everyone was allowed to offer themselves to the market at a wage that employers were prepared to pay. So there was basically full employment. I don't know, look, all three of us passionately want to help the poor. I think you do, and Jorge does, and I say that I do. And the question is, do we help the poor by making it harder for them to get a job? If we decide, now hear this, if we decide that we want people to have a higher income, then contrary to what the alderman says, I think we should pay. If it's a community standard that we want people to have an income that we regard as adequate, then I don't see why I shouldn't be taxed to pay for it. Look, of course you help the people at the margin when you raise the minimum wage, but you hurt everyone below. I don't see the argument for that.
Well, I won't repeat myself, just other than just to say that historical experience points in another direction, and experience of states and jurisdictions that increase their minimum wage points to an opposite direction. I know the fact of cities looking at increasing their minimum wages is really a relatively recent phenomenon, because and it's kind of an interesting phenomenon, because back in the 1930s through 1960s, progressive change often occurred at the federal level. It's flipped itself on its head now.
Yeah.
Now it's coming from the grassroots up. It's coming from cities and municipalities who are on the cutting edge. And so you are seeing other cities do it. And there were a few that did it back in the 1980s. San Francisco and Santa Fe, New Mexico are two examples of cities that imposed a across-the-board minimum wage in their jurisdictions. And both cities experienced not job loss, but job growth and economic growth in those cities. And I mentioned already the study about that looked at the effect of states that have increased their minimum wage. And the fact is simple. It's because it puts more money in people's pockets. And then those folks in the low income level take that money and spend in the local economy to provide for the basics, to buy shoes for the kids, to maybe buy a new winter coat for themselves, or maybe to treat themselves to a movie or something. Sure. Then that money is used, helps the local businesses, makes them hire, they hire more people, they expand. It has a beneficial ripple effect. Now you mentioned, probably almost up with my 2 minutes, but there are a lot of reasons why African American unemployment was lower in the 1950s. We had an industrial economy. The United States was the preeminent nation in the world. We did not have globalization yet, and the fact of tamping down wages across the world. And we also had something else. We had strong labor unions. It wasn't the individuals that bargained, as you indicated, it was labor that bargained on behalf of people and gave them decent wages, and gave them the 5-day work, the 40-hour work week, and gave them the ability to buy a house and to buy a home and to send their kids to college and have what we used to call the American dream. So there are a lot of factors at play, but clearly the fact that there were strong progressive policies in place at the federal level at that time, indeed under both Democratic and Republican administrations. There's not a Republican president in the past that could get elected as a Republican today because of the primary system and how far right the party has gone. But back then there was this general consensus among the country that paying people decent wages was not only good for those people, but it was good for all of us.
So now I'd like to invite you to have one more round of rebuttals to each other. I'm not sure if there's much on the table you want to sink into, but if there is, feel free.
Just a couple of things. The concept of the helping the poor, I don't want to help the poor. I simply want to disappear the poor by disappearing poverty, because I don't think there is any kind of need of poverty.
Yep.
There are riches enough, there is enough wealth in this city, in this state, and in this country, to have middle class everywhere. Yeah, there's always going to be someone who's poorer than others. But I don't think there's any kind of need, for poverty, basically. So I don't want to help the poor. Concept of working poor, that's a novelty. Because it used to be that you were poor if you didn't work, if you were unemployed. But it used to be that if you work, you were not poor. Well, let's go back to that. And the first step going back to that would be to pay at least $15, and I insist, maybe $16 or maybe $17 an hour. Yeah, that way we disappear the poor, we disappear poverty. We don't have to help them anymore. And the other point is, Joe, you were saying you supported an ordinance calling for $10 plus $3 in benefits in 2006. That was $13 an hour. So how come 8 years later you're still calling for 13 and not 15 or 16? I mean, what's the difference? In 8 years, don't tell me that, well, it was good for 2016 for the big boxes, but it's not today, to increase at least $2 more to that $13.
Well, I too want the poor to stop being poor. And I'm an economist, but I'm also in the history department, so I love people who are dead. The more dead, the better. And what's happened if
We don't have to deal with them anymore.
well, that's among their charms, I have to say. But if if you take a long view, the poorest people in the United States have been getting steadily since 1800, since 1900, even since 1980, have been getting better off. So I don't think, Jorge, we want to go back to the 1950s, say, when there were many, many people in the United States who were hungry, chronically hungry and malnourished in all kinds of ways. Now, even poor people have larger houses, apartments. They have access to a kind of medical care that was not available in the 1950s. And so I think we need to look to the future, and we need to avoid having a kind of false nostalgia for the old days. The old days were crappy. That's my scientific conclusion.
I agree parts of the old days were crappy, but there are a few good things that we can learn from.
The Chicago Bears were much better.
All right, I think that's one thing we can all agree on. The Chicago Bears are crappy. Jorge, just one thing. You asked about the difference between the ordinance that I supported in 2006, 2007, and the one that I do now. Well, the one that was 2006 was targeted exclusively at the big box retail stores, the multinational chains that could afford to pay their workers at that. The $13 wage today, it applies across the board. It applies also to the mom and pop folks, the neighborhood restaurants, the stores and businesses there who are, realistically.
Yeah, but it applies to them in 2019.
Realistically less able to absorb a $17 an hour thing. That's just the practical realities. One of the challenges when you hold office is you've got to take your ideals and apply them to the practical realities that we all face. So the Heartland Cafe up in Rogers Park would go out of business if they had to pay their workers $17 an hour. That's just a reality. But let me say this, and it's, I think, a principle that is as American as they say is apple pie, and that is the work ethic. That is, we always say we want people to work. We want people to have jobs. Jobs provide meaning and direction and stability in lives. Makes people not dependent, makes people self-sufficient. No one should have a job that in which they work full-time and not be able to lift themselves out of poverty. That is immoral. It is, if you will, un-American, and it goes against the values that we supposedly represent. So we can throw out all the statistics and everything to support our points of view, but hopefully we can all agree on that one value, that if you work 40 hours a week and you do so in an honest fashion, you should be able to earn enough money to not live in poverty.
So now I'd like to pose 3 questions that I think are related insofar as they all deal with how this problem is affected by changes in the national economy and in the world economy, some of which we've discussed. So first, given record corporate profits and record increases in productivity, why haven't we seen real wages increase? Second, you ignored an enormous group of exempt workers, restaurant workers. This reflects the vast shift to the service economy from manufacturing, and this is a real problem. And third, I often hear the evocation of technology as a job killer regarding a higher minimum wage. Paying fast food workers $15 would result in them being replaced by machines. This sort of conflict seems detrimental. Surely we want technological advances because they result in greater efficiency for all. Perhaps one day fast food will be entirely machine run, but if we are going to have workers do any job, shouldn't they have the decency of a living wage. So if you could please comment on those questions.
It's hard, I have a really small mind. I can only get one question at a time. So maybe when it's my turn to talk, you show me one of the cards and I'll answer that question.
Yeah, I guess I would just try to sort of wrap them together. I think all the questions are pointing to the way in which the economy seems to be changing, such that many people are making a lot of money, but a lot of people,
Right.
as has been discussed, are not able to sell their labor to companies. And a higher minimum wage might prompt mechanization. And so how are we going to respond to that?
Well, can I just make a small point at the outset? The assumption behind the question is that legal changes can make everyone richer. Now, just think about that for a minute. Does that sound plausible to you?
It's happened in the past.
Yeah, you bet. So it sounds plausible to you that if you just have an act of Congress or an act of the City Council, everyone will be better off. Boy, if that's true, I want to sign on to that Kool-Aid. I think that's really great stuff, and I want to have more of it. There's something very strange about
I got a whole list of legislation I'd love to have you sign.
Right. Yeah, I don't think just the Mayor Act improves everything, but obviously steps can be taken in the right direction. I was saying at the beginning, yeah, all the exclusions from the minimum wage. I think the proposal in City Council should eliminate all those exclusions. I don't think we have any kind of need for a tipped worker. If I go to Sears Roebuck and I buy a jacket and the lady who's selling there has to go to the back side of the store and bring another size of it, I don't tip her. But if I go to a restaurant, I have to tip the waiter. Why? For nothing, just because it's legal. I am paying for my wages, part of the wages of the restaurant worker and the car wash worker and any other tipped worker in the United States. Why? Why, if even the law says if you don't make enough in tips to go along with minimum wage, the employer has to complement and pay minimum wage? Let's eliminate the whole tip system.
I agree.
Let's eliminate it. It's useless. Legally, I am being forced to pay from my wages, part of the wages of another worker. Let's eliminate that. Let's eliminate the exclusion of the less than 4 workers. Let's eliminate the exclusion for minors. Let's eliminate the apprenticeship wages. Let's do away with it. Come on. Legislation could improve a lot of things. And of course, let's make it a jail, punishable crime to steal wages. This year, right here, in my job, and we still have 1 month to go, I have recovered $675,000 in stolen wages. $675,000 wages. And I have another lawsuit for $265,000 still pending. So I may hit the $1 million recovered from stolen wages. You know what? Theft is theft. Employer who steals wages should go to jail. That's it.
Agreed.
Let's make it a part of the ordinance. And then I'll agree with you, $13 an hour.
That was one of my experiences whenever I travel abroad. It's always hard for me to adjust to do the not giving a tip. So I still do it anyway because, So, I could support that. Makes it a lot easier.
Let's write it down.
Yeah.
Second. When I'm in City Hall.
Now, you suggested, what could be some legislation that could actually dramatically improve everybody's lives?
Mm-hmm.
How about changes to the tax code?
Well,
We have a vast disparity in wealth, in part because the current tax code helps to to solidify that disparity. There's huge reservoirs of wealth that is not subject to any kind of tax.
I agree.
The financial transactions, perfect place to start. And yet, the city of Chicago is forbidden by federal law from taxing financial transactions. And I'm for one that believes that it should be done on a federal level, so you don't have cities and states, racing to the bottom to try to attract, financial businesses and everything. Let's do it on a federal level. Well, I know politically that's a pipe dream at least for the next 2 years, but start doing that. There's a huge amount of revenue out there that could be then used to invest in our schools and in our roads and our bridges, creating jobs, creating opportunity, kind of replicating a lot of the things we did back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. The kind of investment that allowed me and allowed my father and my family, my parents, to get me to have a quality education, and all these things that we took for granted back in the day, but we no longer can. Unfortunately, we have a tax structure that is based on an economy that no longer exists. It's based on a manufacturing economy that, for many reasons, is just a mere small size compared to what it used to be. We need to closely examine not only a financial transaction tax, but looking at how we can tax, a whole range of services that are not being taxed right now. Why shouldn't legal services be taxed, or consulting fees of all areas? Why should they're part of the economy? They're creating wealth for those folks. Why shouldn't they share a part of the burden so that all of us can reap the benefits?
Yeah, if you want to drive financial services entirely out of the United States, then impose a federal transactions tax. That'll do it. It'll all go to Shanghai and to London. But they're
Except London already has a financial transaction tax, and they're still there.
Yeah, they're still there.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you that there are radical changes we can make in taxation that would be smart. But the basic way that poor people and middle income people and rich people, for that matter, get better off is that the pie gets larger. These proposals from you, Alderman, and from Jorge are proposals for taking from one group of people and giving to another. And a certain amount of that I'm not against. For example, I think we ought to have a much larger inheritance tax, which has become obsolete in the United States because the Republicans persuaded us to call it the death tax. Not only do you die, but you get taxed. Geez, how bad is that? I think from an economic point of view, an inheritance tax, not 100%, but a high one, is a very sensible thing to do. But basically what we need is prosperity. Basically what we need is a larger pie. We need investment. We need, above all, innovation. And taxing and putting money into the hands of the sticky government, with the government with sticky fingers. I won't start accusing you personally. I'm sure you don't. But I don't mean just corruption. I mean that, do we think that the government knows how to spend what we make better than we do? Now, in some issues, yes, it does. National defense, for example. But for many items of our expenditure, we know how to do it better than the government does. And there's not much to be gained. In fact, there's not anything to be gained in increasing the size of the pie by dividing it up slightly differently.
So I guess before we move on, I just want to repose and refocus.
Do I just get
Sure,
one
go
quick
ahead.
response? And you know, yeah, this theory you hear often from the right that, you know, we should decide,
Yeah.
rather than the government decide.
You bet.
Well, who's the government?
You
know, we should be. We should be the government in a perfect world. Obviously, that's been distorted because there are certain elements of our society that have an undue influence on governmental policy.
Yeah.
But in a perfect world, we should be the government, and we, the people, should decide how those resources are allocated to benefit the many rather than the few.
I'd just like to repose the question of technological unemployment, because that's something that I don't know if it's been addressed directly. So, for example, Deirdre, I've heard some socialists argue that that phenomena is what distinguishes sharply the bourgeois era, about which you've written, from the post-industrial revolution era.
Yeah.
And of course, after that, we do see the state intervening and passing a lot of laws that many of us would say have made our lives better, like shorter working hours laws. Jorge, do you not think that if you were to achieve that $16, $17 an hour minimum wage, that one result might be that many tasks currently performed by fast food workers might be automated, and even throughout other sectors of the economy? I've heard rates as many as 40 or 50% of existing jobs. And then Alderman, I'm wondering how this issue of technological employment has been addressed by the minimum wage working group. Is that something that entered your deliberations?
I'll tell you what, I also hate overtime. I believe that working 8 hours is enough work. And I love the European system where you have 2-month vacation. Vacations don't even exist in the labor law in the United States. There are no paid vacations. There are no vacations at all. At all. I think we should abolish overtime. Instead of having a worker working 12 hours, 13 hours, and 14 hours, you could hire 2 guys working 7 hours for 15 an hour, and that would be still, a good wage. Of course, if you want to replace your dishwasher with a machine, sure, you can do it. Yeah, it is possible. But always, getting a machine is going to be more costly than your average worker. So I don't think we are, that'll be science fiction when we all have robots all over and nobody works. I don't think so, but if that is the case, then the robots would make our living so easy that we wouldn't need to work. That's the objective. I mean, that's my science fiction prediction. Yeah, I don't think so. I think technology creates wealth. Well-applied technology creates wealth. Overexploitation also creates wealth. And so, any good employer just balances the two of them. Is it cheaper to get the machine that revolves the cement and that cost me $4,000, or hire 10 guys, with shovels to mix the cement? I don't think machinery is the problem in itself. I mean, let's not go back to Robert Owen and 1801 England. I mean, we are not going to throw monkey wrenches into the machinery. Yeah, I don't think so. I think technology creates wealth. What we have is not a problem of better and more technology. What we have is a problem of greed. When a CEO makes 9,000 times what the workers do and then lays off 700 workers because, oh my God, we are in crisis. We are in crisis, cut your salaries in 50%. $180 million would be enough still to live pretty well. So why don't they cut their salaries? Come on.
The issue about the issue of increasing minimum wage leading to more innovation and technology did not come up in the deliberations of the committee. I for one believe that innovations are going to take place regardless, because there's always going to be a desire on the part of a company to improve their efficiencies and thereby increase their bottom line. So I don't think that that it would be any kind of argument that is at all persuasive in opposing an increase in a minimum wage, regardless of what that increase is. Innovation and enhancements in technology are going to happen regardless of what the wages are.
Well, I completely agree with my colleagues here, and I'm a college professor of economics, and I give you both A on that part.
All right.
Of the exam.
That's about the only part I'm going to get an A.
That's
I think my GPA is still around a D- in her grading scale, but
Well, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. But yeah, but look, robots are tools. Here's a strange case. In Afrikaans, the language of the of the Afrikaners in South Africa, the word robot means traffic light. That's what it means. That's its main meaning. I mean, it also means what we mean by a robot, but it also means traffic light. So you substitute a light for some guy up on a pedestal with white clouds. Look, a famous economist went to China, and he was shown by the Communist Party officials a construction site, and they were digging with shovels. And the economist said, "Why don't you have steam shovels here? Why don't you have robots, power tools?" And the Communist Party official said proudly, "But this way, everyone has a job." And the economist said, "Well, why don't you take away their shovels and give them spoons? Then they'll have more jobs." Jobs are not the purpose, as my colleagues have said. What's the purpose is output, product, making it easier to live.
So I have a question that follows up on that rather nicely. Wouldn't a federal job guarantee program stimulate aggregate demand and provide a minimum wage and benefits as an incubator for the private sector during downturns, and then the workers could be hired by the private sector during upturns? Instead of a buffer stock of unemployed, we could have a buffer stock of employed, a greater anchor on inflation.
Well, there's a lot of economics in there that I don't agree with. One part of it that Joe raised is that if you spend in your local community, that puts people to work. And I don't think that's the right way to look at it. So, no, I think it's a poor idea. Now look, in 1933, it was a perfectly good idea. That was a terrible, terrible crisis, and we had to do something. So I have uncles and cousins who worked in federal employment in the 1930s, my father, for example. And that was a crisis. But what we need to do is get our economy functioning more intelligently than it is now. Fix the taxes, for example.
And not only taxes, I mean, investment. It's, I think the solution to dig a hole to cover another hole worked. I think in 2009, Obama could have done almost close to the same thing. Instead of buying out the auto industry and the banking industry and the I don't know what else bought off, he could have hired 10 million people to paint yellow lines in the middle of the road. It could have been. And then the money would have gone directly to the pockets of people. And that's what really, really, gets the economy moving. So many federal programs and local programs could be applied that way, direct creation of jobs. The problem is that it's not politically wise. Oh my God, big government again. No, it's not big government. Hiring, where are all the youth jobs for summertime? And then we complain about the shootings. What happened to all those jobs? Oh, they are gone. Still, you know, the $49 million a year for lawsuits to police officers, they are still there. They don't disappear. Yeah, but the youth jobs disappeared in the city of Chicago pretty much, as along many other things. I think that having a large body of unemployed only helps the greedy companies. That's it. You know, you don't like it, I can pay less to the next worker that walks down that door. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a threat. It's just a constant threat. Job guarantee. Why not? Roosevelt was about to write it in the New Deal. You know, in the second New Deal. He died, but he was about to. He wanted to. Yeah. If it had happened, we would have it now, you know, and we wouldn't be discussing this. Yeah, but well, he died. What else? What can we do?
And I think as a last resort, the federal government as an employer is much better for our society and for our economy than having people unemployed. However, I think more judicious use of federal resources to try to stimulate the private economy is a better approach.
Yeah.
And I disagree with you. I think one of the best accomplishments of the Obama administration was the support they provided to save the U.S. auto industry, because it's not just those auto jobs; it's all the other jobs that depend on the auto industry. It was probably one of the I think one of the finest achievements of his administration, and one that doesn't get as much accolades as it deserves.
So, Deirdre, we have a question to you on the minimum income.
Yeah.
How would you propose we implement this in a country so opposed to higher taxes? Are there any stable first world countries that have implemented this system?
Sure.
And I guess maybe to also open up the question to each of you, what have you learned from comparing our economy at a city level and a national level to other cities and countries that also might have pursued the policies that you supported?
France had I think it still has I'm going to stutter on it. A
Minimum wage.
Minimum income, not wage.
Income.
That you get when you're 27 years old. You have to learn to work. You have to go to work as a kid. But then, if you can't make it when you're over 27, then you get this income from the state. Income straight from the state. And I was on the L, you might call it, in Paris a long time ago. And this guy came into the car from another car. His purpose was to beg. And he said, he announced in French, of course, that he was 24 years old. And you wonder, why did he tell me his age? Well, because if he was 27, he wasn't going to be able to beg successfully, because everyone would say, look, I paid at the office. I paid through taxes. No, I don't think it's politically impossible. It's been advocated from the right in economics and from the left in economics, both, and for a long time. And we economists on the whole think that to help the poor by giving them, well, a housing subsidy and then maybe a child subsidy, and then we'll make free milk available, blah, blah. That just gives jobs for the boys and girls in government. It makes a lot of employed people in the government, but it doesn't directly help the poor. Give the poor the money, and then don't do the other things.
You guys think to jump in?
It's very, very difficult, because each nation and each culture has so many differences.
Yeah.
It's hard to just say, well, we'll just take that model and bring it to the US, or we take the US model and bring it somewhere else. I will say, though, I've done some traveling, and one of the cities I've visited recently is just not too far away from here, Toronto, Canada.
Sure.
And what I found remarkable about Toronto, a city that's basically the same size as the city of Chicago, is the disparities of wealth just aren't, or disparities between the rich and the poor just aren't as present. That they don't have the same kind of grinding poverty that you see in parts of Chicago. That you don't see the same levels of crime and violence that you see in Chicago. And I don't know what the answer is exactly. Why is that? Because, you know, on all outward appearances, it's culturally almost identical to cities in the U.S., and it's also very incredibly diverse. And so, I would love to kind of learn more about the Canadian experience and why have they been able to have a city that in so many respects appears to be as identical as most Chicago or most U.S. large cities, and yet doesn't have some of the intractable problems that we suffer here in Chicago and other large American cities.
I think because we have justified that you can do anything you want if you have money, and that's it, and the whole system is set up to back that thinking. You have money, you can have money, you can desire and wish to have anything. I got some crazy examples here. There's a beautiful house down here, the Ann Lowry Mansion, 1547 North Dearborn, $8.75 million. It's for sale now if you want to go there. It's got a Wolf 60-inch dual-fuel ranch stove that costs $16,000, $665, and a Jura Impresa Z9 coffee maker for $3,599. That's the United States, that's Chicago, that's our system, and we allow it to be. And we think that that's the American dream. I have a Volvo, I love Volvos. My labor union guys hit me on the head every time they see my Volvo, but I tell them it's a fully union car. It may not be American, but it's a fully union car. But my Volvo is 1997. Yeah, next year Volvos are going to be up to $48,000 each Volvo. Who needs the need to pay rent or the need to eat? Who needs a $48,000 car? Who needs it? My 97 Volvo works. It takes me places, anywhere. We just went to Memphis and came back. Who needs a $50,000 car? Who needs an $18 million mansion? Who needs a Gucci crocodile purse for $41,500? Who needs it? Nobody needs it. But that's the American system.
Jorge,
Yeah?
I agree with you. I think it's disgraceful
That's why you earn 2,000
like that.
minimum wages as a CEO, or 9,000 minimum wages as a CEO, because you need the Gucci. You need the $55,000 Rolex,
I think
which gives you the time, same as this, or same as a Timex $10 clock.
But I think it's disgraceful.
So the luxury, the idea of the luxury, and we are entitled to luxuries.
Athletes that get paid millions and millions.
That's right, but
Yeah.
But although I think it's disgraceful that those people don't endow chairs in economic history or something valuable like that, I don't think it's a government matter.
And that's what I started by saying. Why 15 now? Because that's what we believe, that I believe we can win. It is a political battle. we have to force the government of the city of Chicago to approve $15 an hour minimum wage, or 16, or 17. It's realistic. That's why we don't say 30, because we don't think we can win 30. But we can win 15, and we can win 16, and we can win that is indexed to inflation. That we can win, and we will win it. And by the way, I invite everybody to pay attention December 4th, okay? If you go to downtown and have lunch downtown, bring your tortas, bring your sandwiches, because the next big strike is going to hit on December 4th. Yeah, that's what we think we can win, and we deserve it. We deserve a lot more, but we think we can win 15.
So one audience member points out that raising the minimum wage would be the best crime bill for those drastically under-resourced in Chicago's neighborhoods. Let's say that if we substitute the minimum wage in that question, in Deirdre's case for a guaranteed income, we might all agree that some combination of those policies would indeed have far-reaching effects on people living in Chicago, especially in the poorest neighborhoods. So I want to use that as a pivot to ask a question about strategy. Someone in the audience says, I work for a local company that employs just over 50 workers. In the past few years, this company has seen a huge increase in profits. Despite this increase in profits, the starting wage is still $8.25 an hour. This is after several attempts by both workers and managers asking the owners of the company to raise the starting wage due to our inability to make ends meet. Ultimately, the owners won't budge. This leads me to think the only way to have them play fair is to raise the federal minimum wage. Do you recommend we keep engaging our bosses, or should we join a broader movement? So that question would be primarily for Jorge and for Joe. What do you recommend for people who share your perspective? And for Deirdre, for those who oppose a minimum wage increase but support a guaranteed income, what would you recommend that they do to move that political strategy forward?
All right, I'll go first. I think there's no one, there are different avenues, and one is not the better. One, certainly organizing and engaging in direct action is clearly, and raising people's consciousness is clearly one respectable and effective avenue. The other is working through the system, which is the route that that I've selected, but realizing that I can't work through the system without folks like this guy pushing from the outside. Those are really effective tools, and I don't know the kind of business that the person who wrote the note card is involved in, but perhaps reaching out to one of the local labor unions to try to organize the other workers. That much more difficult to do today with the less than friendly governmental environment, but still doable. There are still successful organizing activities that are taking place across this land, and so reaching out and trying to organize on behalf of your employees and getting experienced labor organizers involved, and try to form a union in your business, because experience has shown when there's workers have a union, they get better wages, they get better benefits than those who try to go it on their own.
We just formed one at UIC, to which I proudly belong, AFFL, CIO, but I don't expect it to raise my wage. I expect it to give the professors a voice against the, shall we say, unhelpful, scornful perhaps is the correct word, scornful attitudes of the administration.
Call me, let's talk about it. I can organize you into a labor union. That's what I do for a living. There are several things here, Every day in and day out, workers complain about, the employer doesn't want to raise the minimum wage, the wages. And I say, well, yeah, that's not illegal. it's unfair and it's unjust, but it's not illegal, because also the minimum wage law doesn't say that anybody has to increase anybody's wages. You know, you can live and die 35 years later with minimum wage in any given place. It's not, minimum wage is not for, you know, young kids. It's, I know a lot of adults earning $8.25 an hour after 25 years working at any given place. And they are fully bilingual, which is a skill, and they are very good at what they do, and they are still earning minimum wage. The only way to really improve your workplace conditions is organizing into a labor union. You then negotiate, which is the key word you said at the beginning, Deirdre. Then you bargain for your wages. Then you write down in a collective bargaining agreement regular increases every year, every 2 years, every whenever. So it's not an employer wants or doesn't want. It's about fairness in the workplace, and it's negotiation in the workplace. That's the only case where you can bargain with your employer is through a collective bargaining agreement. Unless, again, you are the advisor, the political advisor of some campaign, and then you can bargain your wages. Sure. No.
I would argue that wages are determined basically by supply and demand. That is it's not the bargaining power of the American worker, you know, their cleverness in negotiation that makes their wage 30 times higher than the average Pakistani worker. It's supply and demand. It's how productive that economy is.
No. I'm
You
sorry,
don't think
but
so?
no.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry, but no.
we have a
Because
lot-
the
we have a
Mexican
lot to
economy
disagree
has
on.
always been good, yeah, but up to 1938, the oil wasn't ours, and the gold wasn't ours, and the silver wasn't ours, and because the United States, among other countries, used to take all of those riches from Mexico. So we were productive. We are productive. But still, you know, every company that goes down to Mexico pays minimum wage, and all the riches and all the benefits and all the profits are spent here in Gucci crocodile purses. Yeah.
So far from God, so close to the United States.
That's
of
our
America.
condemnation.
Well, I agree. You know, if left to the unfettered marketplace, you know, the laws of supply and demand, then we would have, you know, $1.50, $2 an hour wages, if that. That's why. Well, that's what happened back in the day before government stepped in and finally said, okay, there's a certain floor beneath which you shouldn't pay your workers, Mr. Employer. And you know, that's just the historical reality. And unfortunately, we've kind of gotten away from that, and we need to return to that, and we need to acknowledge the important role that responsible and prudent government intervention can to soften what are otherwise very, very inequitable and socially harmful excesses of an unfettered marketplace.
Well, here's one of the things that the government has done in the last 40 years, and I'd be interested in all of yours opinions on it. The war on drugs. The war on drugs has by itself destroyed Hispanic and African American neighborhoods, created profits for the for gangs, and incidentally, not so incidentally, it's also destroyed the economies of our friends south of the border. So, you know, some things government can do well. There aren't too many interventions it can make that are smart, and it does an awful lot of incredibly stupid things that really do shrink the pie. The war on drugs alone has, it would be an interesting thing to find out about, has cut the income of the United States by a significant amount. It's a catastrophe. It always has been.
It is. So is the war in Iraq and the bombing in Syria.
That's a lot smaller,
you
dear.
know.
That's a lot smaller.
It's $500 million. It was.
It was
You know,
a horrible
at the peak,
thing.
At the
It
peak
was
of the
stupid. I
war,
agree.
we were
I agree.
spending
Okay.
$500 million a day.
But that's government for you.
Yeah, $1 billion every 2 days.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
we have to close 50 Chicago public schools
I agree
because
with
there's
you.
no money.
I agree with you.
Yeah, right. There's no money. You know, we don't need a larger pie. We need a larger pay. The
No.
pie is there.
No,
The pie is there. We don't need a crumbles. You know, we just want a fair share of the pie. And what we think we can win is the 15, at least.
Joe, I'd like to give you a chance to jump in. Can the 15 be won?
I think, as I indicated at the beginning, I signed on originally to the $15 minimum wage, but I'm afraid I respectfully disagree. I think it probably could not be won at this time. We came up with an alternative proposal that I think adheres to the spirit of the $15 minimum wage if we follow the Seattle experience. As I indicated at the beginning, $13 wage in Chicago is equivalent to a $15 wage in the more expensive city of Seattle, Washington.
Sure.
And then we also have to take into account the reality is that if we do $13 in Chicago, if we do 13 or 15, whatever, there is going to be a certain amount of seepage to the suburban communities too. I mean, ideally, the best way to do it would be nationally. The next best way to do it would be statewide. We're only doing it as citywide because we cannot wait forever for our federal or state partners to act. But we have to be sensitive to the disparities too much between what is now an $8.50 minimum wage in the city of Western Springs versus $13 in Chicago, and the deleterious impact it could have on primarily our small businesses here in the city. So we came up with a $13 wage as being what is practical and most able to be implemented in the atmosphere we're operating in right now. And I'm very confident that it will because, quite frankly, to his credit, Mayor Emanuel supports it, and the political reality is if Mayor Emanuel supports it, it will likely pass the city council despite the opposition from some very powerful interest groups in the Restaurant Association, the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, and others that have been lobbying very heavily on this.
So at this point, I'd like to invite each of you to take about 3 or 4 minutes and make some closing remarks. Feel free to make explicit the areas of shared agreement among you and the other panelists, as well as to make explicit the areas of disagreement between you, and any final points that you'd like to offer for the audience.
As I said before, all three of us, from various ways of thinking about it, are in favor of helping the poor, of eliminating poverty, of raising up our fellow citizens. And the question is government a good tool for that? And for a simple system of a minimum income, I think it's quite appropriate, and it could handle that. But I don't think it works well in this clotted, complicated way that this benefit goes to this person and this to that. I think it ends up with favors being called in by various interest groups. I think the best way to help the poor is to get the economy innovating, not using the government to slice up the pie.
I think if there were no governments, you would be happy and we will still be in slavery. Yeah, sure, why not? It's cheaper, to have a slave.
No, it's not.
I think Chicago is changing. Many other cities are changing. The society in the United States is changing. We saw the Occupy movements, large interest by the so-called middle class because they were not proletarians of the world unite. It was middle class being fed up, very fed up with the situation. We saw in Chicago the CTU strike. Teachers decided to bargain for better working conditions more than salaries. It wasn't about salaries. And enjoying the incredible support from everybody in the city of Chicago, I mean, parents and kids and whatnot. We saw the big movement against the school closings and the incredible support it had. We see now the fight for 15. We see the referendum, raising the minimum wage, et cetera, I think society is changing, and unfortunately it's changing because they are fed up because of the greed, because of corporations thinking they are entitled to unmeasurable earnings and profits and not dividing the pie a little bit better. In the fast food and warehouse industry, it is common to say that Costco will never have a labor union because starting wages in Costco are $18 an hour. I think they are right. I think we may see union labor movement organizing drives in Walmart and Kmart and any other one, but Costco won't have one because it's a lot better conditions, and they do exactly the same thing Walmart does, and they don't have all the money Walmart does, but they can pay $18 an hour easily. To demand $13 an hour by 2019 from McDonald's, I think it's a travesty. I think they should be paying $15 an hour tomorrow. That's it.
Yeah. To me, the issue is government or no government. Government is here to stay. I mean, it has been a part of our society at all levels for our entire existence, and become a bigger part beginning in the 20th century as our industrial economy grew and there needed to be the leavening hand of government. The question is, who does that government serve? Mm-hmm. Does it serve the interests of the few? Does it serve the interests of the wealthy? Does it serve the interests of those who have special access to the levers of power? Or does it serve the many? And for far too long, over the last few decades, it has served the few. And what we're fortunately seeing taking place in cities and towns across this country is a growing movement, a growing progressive movement at the municipal level, at the city level. It's the cities that are now the laboratories of progressive experimentation and progressive thinking. And it's the cities that will show the rest of the world, rest of the country, that model, that progressive model that we have sort of strayed away from over the last several decades is truly the model that will ultimately, while imperfect, ultimately will serve to benefit the many rather than the few. And I hope you continue your battles, and we will do what we can in the halls of city halls across the country to bring progressive change, long-awaited progressive change, to this nation.